again. I'm going to have right now, I'm going to move to Randall Carlson. If you don't know him, he's rather well known. I might suggest you look up Joe Rogan, Randall Carlson. Joe Rogan's interviewed him several times. Randall Carlson also has his own website and own YouTube channel. He has an extensive number of lectures that he's done. We're going to go into several key points in some of his lectures and touch on it. Right here, he's going to introduce his audience to the great year and talk about it.
At his astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. You could consider Earth's third motion, next to its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the great year, and it's been measured by...
Okay, so we've seen that the Earth has a wobble. It's Earth's third motion. It's called the great year. That wobble takes 25,920 years to complete one wobble. I mentioned already that this 25,920 year great year is divided into 12 zodiacal signs. It's where we get the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius that we're now entering. Age of Pisces is what we were in. We're entering into the age of Aquarius right now. At those zodiacal ages are 2,160 years, which is a sacred number that we have already determined came from the cube. The cube is 2,160 degrees. So let's see what Randall Carlson has to say further with regard to the great year and any sacred numbers we may also find within that great year.
1,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron.
So we've determined that the great year, 25,920 years long, can be divided into the zodiacal houses, or months, which are 2,160 years long, which, coincidentally or not, is the sum total of the angles of the hexahedron. 2,160 degrees is the hexahedron's sum of its angles. And we've also determined that the great year can be divided into 4 different seasons: summer, winter, fall, spring. And those seasons are 6,480 years long, which is the equivalent of the icosahedron, which has 6,480 degrees in total angles. Now, could it be that there are actually more sacred numbers hidden in the great year? Let's see what Randall Carlson has to say.
Depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160. And then you'll notice the 2 deckhands of the ecliptic, or 20 degrees of the ecliptic, is 1440, the number of degrees in the octahedron. And 1 decan, or 10 degrees, for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represent.
So wow, this is pretty incredible. We have the Earth's wobble, 25,920 year long great year, and from that 25,920 year wobble of our Earth, we are able to derive the 5 Platonic sacred numbers in meaningful ways. They relate to the month, whether they relate to the decans, whether they relate to the seasons. This is pretty incredible. And to suggest that the solar system or the Earth randomly set upon this type of great year and this type of system is somewhat hard to believe. So we have the sacred numbers now in the great year. We have it in our architecture. We have it in our scriptures, whether that's Indian Rig Veda, Quran, or the Bible. Well, let's see where else we can find sacred numbers and what we will be able to derive from that.
5,920 seconds, and set each second corresponding to 1 year of the great year. You'll discover it's exactly 432 minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar. Which is interesting because I think most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. So you could think of a human lifespan as being equivalent to 1 day of the great year. There's an interesting proportional relationship going on there between the total precessional cycle of 25,920 years and 1 human lifetime.
Okay, so now we've been able to determine that our system of timekeeping has sacred numbers embedded in it too. This is pretty impressive. Now it can be argued, and has been argued by some, that our system of timekeeping is just random. We could have another system of timekeeping that would have different numbers, etc., etc. It's just some random thing. Well, the fact is, our system of timekeeping came from the first known civilization. This is called the Sumerian civilization. It existed 6,000 years ago. It appeared in the area of Iraq, what's called Mesopotamia. 6,000 years ago, all of a sudden, just popped up. All of a sudden, with a high civilization. It had bicameral Congress, they had courts, they had record keeping, they had writing, they had everything that we now associate with high civilization. And it just appeared out of nowhere. Now, historians have questioned how this civilization could just suddenly appear out of nowhere. The Sumerians themselves had an answer to that. They said that their Sumerian civilization was a gift of their gods. They also stated that their system of timekeeping and their system of numbers was also a gift of the gods. So that's where we get into where that timekeeping came from. It appeared to come from some type of civilization higher than the Sumerians. Some gods that the Sumerians worship. Now this numerical system is what's called a sexagesimal system. It's based on 60. From whence we get the 360 degrees that we use in a circle. In addition, you may note that our system of timekeeping currently is based on 60. We have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. There are also 12 hours in a day. The 12 is in keeping with the 60-based system. So our system of timekeeping harkens all the way back to that first civilization, which said that they got their system of timekeeping from their gods. So this is very significant because their system of timekeeping is embedded with sacred numbers. So, you know, it appears that this system of sacred numbers as well came from the gods. Let's hear what Randall Carlson has to say about the Sumerian civilization and what they state about their gods and the rule of their gods in the ancient past, long before Sumeria even existed.
Kings, what does pre-diluvian mean? Before the flood, right. So they had this belief that there were 10 kings reigning before the flood. And you'll notice the numbers that they ascribed to each of the kings, the reign, those numbers now should all be becoming familiar to you. You've seen a bunch of them already. There's 43,200, 64,800, 36. You'll notice 64,800 is presented twice, actually 3 times. The total, though, 432,000 years. That's a long span of time. Do you think they meant this literally, or is this strictly symbolic and figurative? Is it possible that the king could have reigned for 36,000 years? I tend to think it was symbolical, but you know, it is interesting that one of the universal traditions from ancient cultures is that before the flood, and all the cultures from all over the world recognized that there was a great flood or even floods that decimated humanity at various times, but they're all pretty much in agreement that prior to the flood, the human lifespan was much longer than it is today, which I find we've all heard about Methuselah living to be 969 years, right? Or Lamech being 777. It seems that they had, in the biblical ages, they seem to have lived about an order of magnitude greater than our modern ages. Which, considering, you know, from my perspective, the things I'd like to get...
All right, so just to recapitulate, we've got the sacred numbers. They're derived essentially from just one circle. That circle divides into 2, divides into a whole bunch, which ultimately becomes the flower of life, which mimics cellular division, more than likely, thus the name of the flower of life. As I stated before, at one point you were a little cell dividing and ultimately became the egg of life, then the fruit of life, and then the flower of life. So that's where it's derived. It appears to be derived from the creation of life, how life is created. But we've also seen sacred numbers in architecture. We spoke about it in scripture. We've seen it embedded in our system of timekeeping. It just showed you where the Sumerians, their history, their king list, again, has sacred numbers all through it. Now we're going to take a look at something that really is going to it's the culmination of where we're heading to, where we find sacred numbers as well. It's pretty astounding. And once again, I'm going to turn to Randall Carlson and let him tell you where we've also found sacred numbers.
Sacred numbers embedded in solar system architecture. I'm only going to show you a few examples of this in order to convey to you the idea. The solar orb. Well, if we measure that, we discover its radius is 432,000 miles, which of course means that its diameter is 864,000 miles. So notice that we measure the sun according to the human measure of miles. And by the way, what is the origin of the mile unit that we use? Anybody know? Origin of the mile? Origin of the mile, it comes from the Latin word mil, which means 1,000. So it's talking about 1,000 something. What would it be talking about? 1,000 what? 1,000 paces that average 5.28 feet in length. It actually goes back, we know that Romans were using a mile that were 1,000 paces, and they would lay out, Rome, for example, had a city center, and everything was measured outwards from that city center according to paces, and those paces were 1,000 of them gave the Roman mile. The Roman pace was a little bit shorter than the British pace, which is where we get our mile from. Our mile, in fact, interestingly, and I'm going to show you a diagram of this shortly, Stonehenge is 105, the outer ring of the Sarsen stone circle measures right at about 105.6 feet, which makes it 1/5 of a mile, or 1/50th of a mile, I'm sorry. That and several other numbers that we find in megalithic structures in ancient England suggest that the mile was actually a unit of measure that was being used as long ago as 4,000 years or longer. And we're still using it today, the same unit of measure that could have been used 4,000 years ago. And for that reason, you know, and once you begin to get into and understand the sacred basis of our ancient metrological or measuring systems, you'll realize that if we convert completely over to the metric system, we're going to lose something very, very profound. All right, remember, what was the length of the Kali Yuga? 432,000 years. What was the length of the Dwapara Yuga? 864,000 years. What was the length of a Platonic month? 1/12 of the great year. Anybody remember? 2,160 years, right? The same number of degrees that measure the cube. All right, what are we looking at here? Anybody recognize that? Look familiar? The moon has a radius of 1,080 miles, which gives it a diameter of 2,160. Remember I said that 1,080 or 108, and it's double, 2,160 was a lunar number. See, this is a clue to you now. There are several references, for example, in the Sumerian tradition describing the ark built by Xisithras, which is being described as a cube that makes no sense. You think, what kind of a ship is it that would be described as a cube? You know, that wouldn't be very seaworthy, a cube, right? But it's not referring to an actual ship as we think of it. It's referring to the cubing of the sphere. And in this case, the sphere that it's referring to is the moon, which was symbolically considered to be an ark to many of the ancient cultures that believed that the earth was periodically destroyed by great catastrophes. So we have the number 1,080, and we have the number 2,160. And then we have the earth. You know, that's the earth. And again, because of the spinning of the earth on its axis, we have this difference between the polar diameter, 7899, or just thinking round number, 7,900 miles, and the equatorial diameter, 7,926. So that creates a 26-mile difference. And thank you for that 26-mile difference, because life on Earth would be a very chaotic affair without that bulge. We see that the diameter of a sphere with the same surface area as Earth is 7,920 miles. And also the diameter of the Earth, when you take it from, if you slice it through the Tropic of Cancer through to the Tropic of Capricorn, that diameter also is about 7,920. So we use 7,920 as the sacred number to represent the Earth, because even though the Earth varies considerably between equatorial and polar diameters, we find that at a very significant piercing through of the Earth's diameter from one tropic to the other tropic turns out to be 7,920 miles. We also find that if we take a perfect sphere that has the same area, the same surface area as the Earth actually has, its diameter would be 7,920 miles. So that's the number we use for the Earth, which means that its radius is half that, or 3,960. And in most books you read, astronomy and so forth, when they're talking in round numbers about the radius or the diameter of the Earth, these are the numbers they use. 7920.
Wow. So now we have sacred numbers embedded into the architecture of the solar system itself. That's pretty intense, and it makes one wonder how it got there. Next, I'm going to turn to a potential answer. I think it is without a doubt the answer, and I'll expound upon that a little later in this video. But it comes from